All right, this section we're going to talk a little bit about some of the trends with craft beer and good quality beer made at places like Gallagher's here, and also some of the specifics to the state of Washington, quite a beer state. You may remember about 15 years ago, IPAs, India Pale Ales, were a big hit. In Britain, they're uneventful, but in the US, West Coast IPAs have quite a hop load. Well, that's evolved. It went through a turn where they were high alcohol double IPAs, but now we're finding a lot of the IPAs are much lower in alcohol and they're citrus enhanced. So they're called hazies, and they're called New England style IPAs. That's a trend. Sours are a trend. Belgian farmyard sours, sours that are made with bacteria that make the beer almost like a vinegar and then you add something sweet. That's a big trend. A couple other trends are oak beer, beer that's been aged in rum or whiskey barrels. And then another trend that is a really good one that Dave and I have talked about before are session beers. What does that mean? That means lower alcohol beers so that you can enjoy more than one or two, you know, and not have to worry about the high alcohol content. And you will see sometimes even famous beers like Two Hearted are made where they're called light Two Hearted. So it's the same beer recipe, but it has much less alcohol. Now, the biggest trend recently is cider, seltzer, and hard iced tea. All of these things are made by the major breweries. And they're all been picked up now because the marketing on these is phenomenal. So you will also be able to go in multi-tap places and get a glass of seltzer or a cider. I want to move on to industry. In 1970, there were 44 breweries in the US. Today, there are 8,000. Washington State has 425, but we do not have a single major brewery. Okay? However, we have breweries in 140 cities in the state of Washington. Bellingham has the most breweries per capita, 7 to 8 breweries per 100,000 people. In the US, California has 925, but Vermont has 68 and has 1/50th the number of people of California. So you can see there's been an explosion all across the US in breweries. Here in Seattle, the Heinrich brothers started Rainier Brewing in 1880. After Prohibition, they trademarked the big R that you've seen around. Rainier beer was sold 2 or 3 times in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And then it's back. It's back in 2016 in Woodinville, here in the state of Washington. Rainier is made by Red Hook. Okay, what about Yakima? 65% of the hops in North America come from Yakima, a big beer region. And Edmonds. Edmonds was a dry town. They voted to be dry prior to Prohibition. In 1909, Edmonds became a dry town. In 1933, that law was repealed and everything took off again. What do you have here in Edmonds that's so nice? And I really enjoy this part of Edmonds. You have breweries, you have bottle shops that have taps, multi-taps. You have multi-tap bars and pubs. You have restaurants that have multiple kinds of beer now on draft. You have gas stations where you can go get a growler, okay? So in Edmonds itself, you have many, many beer opportunities, and I would encourage you to enjoy what Edmonds offers. We're going to go to a question and answer period now, and Dave's going to start.
So one of the questions I know you probably get a lot, and again, is what are the fundamental differences between IPA and the Pale Ale?
Okay, so Pale Ale is a British style that has a hop load with usually Fuggle hops. And so the score of hops on a Pale Ale from Britain might have a hop load of 18 to 30. That's the scoring analysis. You can get IPAs in the United States that are 110. Now that might sound impressive, and what it is, you really can't taste an IPA beyond a level of 80, but you can certainly smell it. If I pour a 110 hopped IPA, as I pour it, I can smell the hop load, so that's the difference.
And sometimes you see like IBU on the cans or beers or bottles of beer when you're buying them. What is IBU?
So international bittering units, and so that's the actual index that's used to measure the hop load. So a hoppy IPA American made, New England style, might be 70. Where a Marzen, like this nice beer, might have a hop load because of the malt and some of the yeast contribution as well. IBU isn't just hops, but it can be a little bit of the toastiness and roastiness of the beer. Stout has a higher hop load than, say, Pilsner.
So would the casual beer drinker really care one way or the other?
Casual beer drinkers are going to fall in love with a style, and then they're going to expand that. And so there's nothing wrong. If you love Rainier on draft, I got to tell you, it's one of the best Pilsners I've had, and I've had plenty from the majors. If you can find Rainier cold in a store, enjoy it.
One of the trends we're also seeing is that even with microbrews being sold, in grocery stores, seeing a lot more canned. So what's the difference? Like, is there a preference, can versus bottle?
In the old days, no. In the 60s and 70s, when I would open a tin can for my father, those cans added a metallic taste to the beer. He was lucky. He drank quarts of Ballantine. He went right to the beer distributor. However, when you get a bottle of beer today, there's about a 1/4 inch to 3/4 of an inch at the top, and the beer will oxidize. Now with the new cans, IPAs in particular can last a year.
Oh, wow. What about this special drink I've heard about called the Jolly Roger?
Yeah, so I'm smiling because I was a bartender, and a lot of folks would come in when I bartended in a craft multi-tap, and the young lady would say, I'm not much of a beer drinker. And I said, well, hold on. And we had a nitrogen-driven beer called Rubaeus, which was raspberry. And I would mix that with the Pilsners, so she didn't have the high alcohol, but she still had the raspberry and the nitrogen. And occasionally we would put a Radler in with that, a soda beer, and before you knew it, it tasted like Jolly Rancher. And I said, well, my name's Roger, we're going to call it Jolly Roger.
You have to make that for me sometime.
Yeah, it'd be fun.
Great. Well, thank you, Roger. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Learned some great stuff.
And Prost. Two-handed Prost.
I already drank mine.